awareness of the disproportionate impacts of climate change on low-income, historically marginalized communities. A poet, painter, and novelist, Merrie is the founder of Read for Science, a small business dedicated to bringing students into empowering relationships with reading, science, and the arts. She is the author and illustrator of a series of 4 nationally implemented science education novels for middle grade readers, and the text Science Teachers Who Draw, The Red is Always There. Dr. Maida von Sickle is a full professor at the College of Charleston, a teacher with over 30 years experience. Maida earned her PhD in science education at the University of South Florida. She teaches science methods for several programs, an active member of several professional societies. Maida is especially active in the Association for Science Teacher Educators. Her work has focused on STEAM and talent development practices for the past 10 years. She has numerous peer-reviewed articles, book chapters, and 4 co-edited books related to these topics. Her most favorite chapter she wrote on the topic of talent development in science, published in Talent Development in Schools, an Educator's Guide to Implementing a Culturally Responsive Talent Identification and Developing Program, that was published by Prufrock Press. She particularly loves co-authoring and believes it brings out the best in all of the authors. And she has co-authored several articles and book chapters with Dr. Merrie Koester. And now I'm going to turn it over to them.
Thank you so much, Jen. Good afternoon, everyone. Maida and I are so honored to be part of this Climate Friday program. We're really happy that you would join us, especially during your lunch breaks. So as we begin, I encourage you to let your mind come into a receptive state so that you may ponder why it is that human beings, supposedly the most evolved of all living things, so often find it easier to tear things down than to build them up. Then we'll ask, how can the power of care and concern dismantle these kinds of narratives? This latter inquiry is why we're here today. So this presentation will follow the arc of a story. Therefore, it would spoil it if we told you what was going to happen next. So I'll start this story now. Once upon a time, in what seems like many years ago, but was really just last fall, Maida and I taught a sustainability literacy course called Being in a Situation, the Art and Science of Resilience. The name of this course is a tribute to educator and activist Paulo Freire, who wrote that human beings are because they are in a situation. If we have ever found ourselves in a situation, it is now. In a pandemic, in an era of sea level rise, and in a nation divided against itself. I now invite you to close your eyes and to take a deep, full breath into your belly, and then let it out. And consider this reflection, dated November 8th, 2020. 9 months into the pandemic, enough time for an infant's gestation, a virus to steal our breath, and our care for, with, and about one another to once again be called into question. Enough time too for a cry of enough to echo from wave to mountain to valley, and for a reply to come back. Enough, enough, enough. And so imagine that today, time begins again, and we remember who we are before then happened. Now open your eyes. And if you feel comfortable doing so, I hope you'll turn on your cameras for just this part, even if it's just for this part. Because I'd love for you to smile at one another and see each other's beautiful humanity. Oh my gosh, I got chicken skin feeling your beautiful humanity. We are all teachers and we are all learners. One Friday a month, we have gathered together to discuss climate change and its impacts. The reflection I just shared seems to amplify the powerful messaging of other Climate Friday sessions, especially those that have called for a reworlding, a reimagining, centered in optimism, joy, and above all, care. So the first thing we wanted to do in this course, since it was called Being in a Situation, the Art and Science of Resilience, was to lay out what we believed and science was as a phenomenon. And so you'll see a list of the precepts that we put together here, but we want to focus on the idea of science as a way of showing us how much we don't know rather than what we think we know. And science is a way to practice, to discover what is connected to what in a system. And then in the same course, to consider art as a way of bearing witness to the world, as well as areas of ultimate concern to you personally.
So now we want you to just take a moment and think of a time when you felt the most joy in a school learning environment. When you have one, feel free to speak it. Nobody had any moments of joy in their schooling years?
When I was in the library surrounded by books.
There you go. Thanks, Jen.
Mary's guided meditation from just like 3 minutes ago.
Oh.
It's pretty awesome.
Being outside, yes, I love that, Susan. Thank you. Yes, you can put it in the chat too. A lot of times our undergraduate students will say, my favorite time was lunch or recess. And I don't blame them. Those are the social times, and we need social time as well as academic idea time. Dance classes, going on field trips, your class, exchanging ideas with students in the cistern yard. Those are all great answers. Thank you.
All right.
So now I want you to do another recall. Recall a school experience in which you felt free and empowered. Free and empowered. Music class. Getting an award. Sure, great. Art class. Having truly open discussions where curiosity and imagination is welcome. What a beautiful thought. Sent out to do research in the community. For me, it was always having that big aha moment, making a cogent comment in a philosophy class that helps spur the conversation. Yes, poetry class. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful.
Whoa, for a minute there, I was afraid that people were not going to remember anything joyful or powerful in their entire education leading up to now. So phew. So that's a good thing. And we know at the College of Charleston, that's what this is about. Now, we want to take you outside of ourselves a little bit and think back to a time, and it doesn't have to be in school, in which you were afforded opportunities to develop a relationship with the natural world. And then would you drop in the chat or say out loud the way you felt when you were afforded opportunities to be either active or still with nature?
amazed, inspired, buzzing with curiosity, connected. Yeah,
Wow, exactly.
I agree.
When I hear those kinds of words, I feel what you're remembering.
Nourished in the moment. Beautiful.
Nourished in the moment. Oh my gosh. So
Gentle feeling of love. Yes.
a gentle feeling of love.
Peace. Fearless. Mhm.
Sorry for a second, my slides went out. I think I might have had another one of those power surges. All right, so Maida and I, as science educators, are y'all seeing the full screen? Here we go.
No, you need to put it in presentation. There you go.
There you go.
Yeah, you're on full now.
Thanks so much. Let me know if it burps out in another way and I'll fix it. So in our work as science educators, as human beings, as artists, Maida and I, and we ask you to consider this, a being in the world that is ecological. For our mantra, we use this statement by biologist E.O. Wilson, who's author of the text Biophilia. We cannot remain human if the psychic thread to the natural world is broken. Cannot remain human. We hold with Ubuntu scholar Leslie LaGrange, who makes this claim: when our being in the world becomes ecological, the imperative to care arises.
On Christmas Eve, 1968, astronaut Bill Anders snapped a photo of the Earth as Apollo 8 orbited the moon. Those three guys were surprised to see from their eyes what a planet looked like an Earthrise, a blue orb hovering over the moon's gray horizon with deep oceans and silver skies. It was our world's first glance at itself, a first chance to see a shared reality, a declared stance, and a commonality, a glimpse into our planet's mirror. And as threats drew nearer, our own urgency became clearer as we realized that we hold nothing dearer than this floating body we all call home. We've known that we're caught in the throes of climactic changes some say will just go away, while some simply pray to survive another day. For it is the obscure, the oppressed, the poor who, when the disaster is declared done, still suffer more than anyone. Climate change is the single greatest challenge of our time. Of this, you're certainly aware. It's saddening, but I cannot spare you from knowing an inconvenient fact, because it's getting the facts straight that gets us to act and not to wait. So I tell you this not to scare you, but to prepare you, to dare you to dream a different reality where, despite disparities, we all care to protect this world, this riddled blue marvel, this little true marvel, to master the verve and the nerve to see how we can serve our planet. You don't need to be a politician to make it your mission to conserve, to protect, to preserve that one and only home that is ours. To use your unique power to give next generations the planet they deserve. We are demonstrating, creating, advocating. We heed this inconvenient truth because we need to be anything but lenient with the future of our youth. And while this is a training in sustaining the future of our planet, there is no rehearsal. The time is now, because the reversal of harm and protection of a future so universal should be anything but controversial. So, Earth, pale blue dots, we will fail you not, just as we chose to go to the moon. We know it's never too soon to choose hope. We choose to do more than cope with climate change. We choose to end it. We refuse to lose. We do this and more, not because it's very easy or nice, but because it is necessary. Because with every dawn, we carry the weight of the fates of this celestial body orbiting a star. And as heavy as the weight sounded, it doesn't hold us down, but it keeps us grounded, steady, ready, because an environmental movement of this size is simply another form of an Earthrise. To see it Close your eyes, visualize that all of us in this room and outside of these walls or in these halls, all of us change makers, or in a spacecraft floating like a silver raft in space, and we see the face of a planet anew. We relish the view, we witness its round green and brilliant blue, which inspires us to ask deeply, wholly, what can we do? Open your eyes, know the future of this wise planet is right in sight, right in all of us. Trust this earth uprising, all of us bring light to exciting solutions never tried before, for it is our hope that implores us at our uncompromising core to keep rising up for an earth more than worth fighting for.
What Gorham, I believe, has achieved here, I can't watch that without getting choked up, so I have to collect myself, represents an almost thermonuclear fusion of science and art, and bears witness to the power of aesthetic energy that does work on your heart, your mind, and your spirit. In my own writing, I conceptualize aesthetic energy as follows: as a renewable form of human energy characterized by the presence of care, that is, openness, empathy, emotional connection, all sustained by acts of noticing and awareness, and flexible, creative ontologies and epistemologies.
So hopefully you've noticed a lot of an ethic of care through everything that you've seen so far, including Amanda Gorham's poem. Doing a care-based curriculum depends on seeing relationships with yourself, seeing relationships with others, seeing relationships with other non-living things, seeing relationships with ideas. Those experiences from the other may be different from your own. And the first step is to care for yourself, then for other human beings, for the natural and human-made worlds, and then really importantly, for the world of ideas. Too many times we stop at caring about. A caring about means I noticed, I paid attention, but I'm not yet willing to take any action. When I begin to care for, I begin to take some action. In our thinking, you also have to care with. So the positionality of the other, whether it's another living human being, another idea, has to be thought about from their perspective as well as your own.
So Maida, as you may have guessed from that, has spent her life examining the role of care in the classroom. It's been my honor to work with her and learn from her. I'd like to also introduce you to this German term, Einfühlung, just a feeling into a dilemma experienced by another. I got to speed things up a little bit as I'm looking to my watch, but I want you to consider in your formal K-12 education, have you been invited and challenged to consider the situatedness of others? And how often does this happen in our test-driven way of teaching and learning? When have we had the time, the space, the opportunity to consider the situatedness of others, as we're doing here in this moment? So in this class, the centering text upon which I built the curriculum is based on Gruenwald's paper, The Best of Both Worlds, A Critical Pedagogy of Place. And I loved this article because he does an amazing job of clearly presenting how Paulo Freire conceptualized the phenomenon of being in a situation. For Frary, reflecting on one's situation corresponds to reflecting on the space one inhabits. Next, acting on one's situation corresponds to changing one's relationship to a place. And Frary didn't stop there. He was very, very specific about how you went about doing that. And he said that we needed to enter into our process of critical consciousness raising. And I hope I don't mispronounce this. He called it conscientizazo. Dr. France, I'm sorry if I messed that up. But this idea of critical consciousness raising, Frary said that the only way we can do that is to learn how to read the world for ourselves. As I began to lean into this and say, all right, Frary, I got to figure out how to do this in a K-12 classroom. My goal is to achieve a critical, place-based consciousness in an 8th grade class. Because I've been a middle school teacher for most of my career. So over that career, I began to develop a pedagogy that begins with this phenomenon of educational vulnerability. That is, when something you don't know can increase your risk of harm, thereby putting you in a situation, including being taken advantage of. And I posited that in order to move to a higher state of resilience, one could move through a 3-question critical place-based literacy approach. The 3 questions: what can you notice? What can you know? And what can you do with the info? And in our class last term, since Maida is a musician, I asked her to turn this into a rap. Maida, would you give them a little performance on how we did that?
What can you notice? What can you know? What can you do with the info?
Yes, and I can tell you right now that's very difficult to pull off in Zoom because of all the delays. What can you notice? What can you know? What can you do with the info? So, ecologist and environmentalist David Orr has said that a place has 5 components: a landscape with particular flora and fauna. It's part of an ecosystem with a variety of microsystems. It has a geologic past, a human history, and then there's this: a group of inhabitants who are part of a social, economic, and political order. And I drew this hand and had it intersect with all of these things to convey the many ways in which we leave our marks on a place. Let's focus in on the politics. Here's David Orr again from Earth and Mind. And I'll insert a little bit of my own ideas in here too. So he said, for our politics to work as they do now, in other words, in unsustainable ways, a large number of people must be ecologically illiterate and ecologically incompetent. They must believe the big lie. He didn't put that in there, I inserted the big lie that this is not only inevitable, but desirable. Furthermore, the electorate must be ignorant of the basis of their dependency. In the SLI, or Sustainability Literacy component, of our class, Being in a Situation, we used anthropologist Melissa Hargrove's writing and research on white habitus in Charleston, South Carolina, as a theoretical framework. And I'm going to go ahead and read this slide to you because it's so, so important. Throughout the Deep South and ever since the Civil War, there has been a consistent pattern of erasure of Black history and displacement from their neighborhoods when power brokers wanted their lands and homes for their own commercial gain. Today, we call that gentrification. In order to justify the acts of condemnation and displacement, and throughout Charleston's history, false or exaggerated claims of the nearby soil or water being toxic or polluted have been used. Perhaps the most famous example occurred in the Ansonboro neighborhood in Charleston, and Hargrove writes with great detail on this tragedy. For Hargrove, she conceptualizes white habitus as a system of strategies of urban renewal in which power agents, be they county commissioners, preservation agents, urban planners, or members of city zoning departments, develop what James Baldwin has called an officially sanctioned reality based on the collective agreement to misinterpret the world. The white habitus narrative we will share with you now is situated in the Gaston Creek watershed on the west side of Charleston. Many of you in this room have heard this story before, but it bears repeating and passing on. So let's go back in the past to 1872. And here's a hand-drawn map of the west side of Charleston. And the green star represents what was the Fiddlers Green community, which was the largest African-American community ever to be sustained, thriving, you name any word, empowered in the history of Charleston. This completely self-sufficient African-American community lived interdependently with one of the most robust ecosystems our peninsula has ever enjoyed. From their homes, they would have enjoyed views that looked like this. All that swiftly changed in 1938 when a tornado spawned by a hurricane ripped through the community. At nearly the same time, another tornado tore across the east side of Charleston, destroying many, not destroying, but damaging many city buildings, churches, and the homes of affluent property owners. Here's the situation. While federal WPA funds were made available to pay for the tornado damage on the east side white neighborhoods in the city of Charleston, city leaders, together with the Charleston Housing Authority, took advantage of new HHFA funding for so-called urban renewal to condemn the homes of African Americans in this community around Gaston Creek, even though the damage was deemed reparable and there were many skilled carpenters working in the sawmill powered by the creek. A petition signed by 40 African American property owners was developed by Mr. John Harris of 49 Norman Street. And he wrote, "If we are forced to give up our homes at this time, it will be the greatest tragedy to befall an unfortunate people. Instead, some 300 African American families lost their homes and were given the option of living in barrack-style homes, like you see here. These homes were described by scholars as emulating prison camps. Historian Christopher Alexander explained, people in the ghetto are usually forced to live there, isolated from the rest of society, unable to evolve their way of life. The ripple effects continue to this day." By the late 1950s, well before sea level rise and environmental justice were even things, and the flood mitigating services of salt marshes were vastly underappreciated, it became common practice for coastal cities to reclaim salt marshes by covering them with trash and dirt. Similarly, without considering the impacts of the African American community or the impact on the quality of the water in the Ashley River, the magnificent Gaston Creek became the city dump until the Clean Water Act forced the city to close it. This history of takings from the community, as well as opposition by numerous scientific organizations against any further development on Gaston Creek, has been meticulously curated by the Friends of Gaston Creek activist group. Let's go back to this 1872 map and consider why it really is that this area floods so badly. And for the most informative reading on this subject, I highly recommend Low Country at High Tide, A History of Flooding, Drainage, and Reclamation in Charleston by Christina Ray Butler. So here's Line Street. Here's Haygood Street. Here's Fishburne Street. Here's Lockwood Street. So basically the channels of this robust creek were turned into roads. Fast forward to the present. The streets are sinking under the weights of the asphalt. And with every rain, here, what used to be the channel of a creek naturally fills with water, because water is going to go where water always goes. It has been reported that there have been times that water has actually come up through the shower stalls of Gaston Green homes. In 2018, in response to a permit by the developer to fill in the creek, the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources wrote this: "The filling of natural marsh areas in Gaston Creek and replacing them with impervious surfaces will likely exacerbate drainage problems and should not be considered a viable option for solving drainage problems in this watershed." In the same report, speaking to the potential environmental impact on the creek, which by the way is a federally protected wetland, DNR wrote, "Tidal creek systems provide critical feeding grounds, spawning areas, and nursery habitats for many species of fish, shellfish, birds, waterfowl, and mammals. Most shorebirds are totally dependent on intertidal flats as a feeding ground. Intertidal marsh area also provides water quality and enhancement functions through the filtration and assimilation of upland runoff. So as we speak, Gaston Creek is collecting harmful pollutants that would otherwise end up in the Ashley River." In our College of Charleston course, we used readers' theater as a way to enter this situation involving a creek and white habitus. And the readers' theater shares the story of a class of 8th graders in a school in the Gaston Green projects who worked with me to move from noticing into knowing and into doing. "I'm really worried about coming to school because I have to walk in the floodwater and I don't like it, and my shoes are getting wet and my clothes are getting dirty and the water is nasty. Where do these waters come from?" Then, after working with us over a series of weeks on the science of why it floods and why storm drains either work or don't work, they're able to say, "It's going to be a bad flood day around here. King tide and a storm both at the same time. The drains will fail just like they always do on days like this." And then we read them John Harris's letter. "What Mr. Harris said, whoa, what you mean? This whole area used to belong to us? Our families owned homes right on a huge salt marsh like rich people? And we had riverfront property and businesses here? Our families were baptized in this creek and it was beautiful and we were allowed to swim in it? You're saying we lost all that?" Peter London, who is a philosopher and arts educator, has written, "Artists bring their minds, bodies, and spirits to bear upon their work, and in this way create meaning for others." Having moved through the stages of noticing and knowing, I challenged these students to make art that spoke to their most ultimate concerns. I said, "What art do you want to make?" I said, we want to make hip hop. We want to make rap. And at that point in time, I went, "Oh my gosh, I need help." And I believe in God moments, you guys. I will tell you that all day long. And right at the moment, I needed to have the most gifted musician, singer, songwriter, arts educator lo and behold, we were able to work with singer-songwriter Lorna Roberts, who helped these students find their voices. And then I had already been working with a young dancer named Lamar Hunter. And in one take, we shot, and then he edited the video I'm going to share with you now. It's pretty raw. It's not professional, but wait till you see this. Hold on a second. Now I just have to find it.
Remember to turn share back on.
I know. Hold on a second. I'm having my issues here. Here we go. Tell me if it comes on, Maida.
You got to share. Got to share.
Okay. Sorry, this happens to me all the time. Thank goodness for Maida is all I have to say. All right, try again. Say when, Maida.
Okay, good.
Yep.
I think you forgot to turn on the
Yeah, we're not hearing any singing.
Merrie, stop share.
It all depends on the mood swing. We're on a mission, I people permission, find a solution for our citizen.
Something go wrong?
It's all right. Just share. When you put on share, remember to click those two bottom boxes.
Were you not able to hear the sound just now?
No, do you mind starting it? Can you share again and then start from the beginning? The sound was off for like the first 30 seconds.
Oh, that's because Lamar Hunter did that as an artistic effect.
Oh, okay.
Okay, you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Take two.
You got to share it still though.
Oh, my goodness. I'm going to try again. I'm sorry. Thank you guys for your patience. Take three, go. Now?
It's good.
Yep.
It's good.
High, low, do, re, mi, all these times up on the street. Swing, hey, not the same thing. It all depends on the mood swing. We're on a mission, I people permission, find a solution for our city's evolution. Gaston Creek is filled with trash. Now you're funny in the city, yeah. So high, low, do, re, mi, all these times up on the street. Swing, hey, not the same thing. It all depends on the mood swing. Trash in the creek, beneath our feet. There's a bus from building these streets. Gaston Creek and trying to make it come back. But the engineers ain't having none of that. High, low, do, re, mi, all these times up on the street. Spring, hey, not the same thing. It all depends on the mood swing. Because of all the ground construction, Gaston Creek is facing reduction. When we live, you stagnate, you will never go away, you even get sick. High, low, do, re, mi, all these times up on the street. Spring, hey, not the same thing. It all depends on the mood swing. It all depends on the mood swing.
Oh. Just seeing those kids again, they're now seniors in high school. And they continue to be involved in this work in the community. So when we took this situation,
Good grammar and spelling
oh
are
my
important.
goodness.
But if you want to write
Sorry.
essays that inspire, messages that forge brighter connections, and
It's like your
emails
worst
that get the
nightmare.
job done, you need to think about more than just grammar.
Maida, how often did this happen in our class?
Not often.
Oh, yes, it did. She's being very generous. I can really mess up a Zoom pretty easily. That's all right. I'm a human being, imperfectly human. So in our College of Charleston class, we asked our students to consider the unjust situation of why flooding is so much worse in a community like this. And we asked what's connected to what over a period of time in the Gaston Creek situation. What patterns change over time as well as cause and effect have happened here. And our students just blew us away with the art that they created. And I'm hoping that you'll come back and take more time to really enter into this artwork when you have more time. But look at the ways in which this young artist has portrayed the developer and climate change in the human community as being buried right along with the creek. She wrote, "The Gaston Creek situation is more than just preserving the environment. It is about bringing justice to the people who live here." And then this one here by young Leah Redfern, who is working with me again, another student. And she describes how she created a watercolor that shows the divide between these two communities within 500 meters of each other. The bottom half is barely hanging on by a thread, and the top half is full of luxurious and radiating things. The top half portrays a sweet and happy, fulfilled life, with people blind to the actual reality that many people are living in poverty. It's a world on the bottom where there are garbage, rundown homes, and sewage drains that are leaking scars and simple coins. It's a magnificent piece of work. And if you're feeling frustrated, I'm going to tell you that there's this amazing place in Charleston. You can go to the Bridge of Nowhere, which is at the end of Petty Street off of Harriet, walk all the way down to the end, and there's this place that says "Scream Here." I highly recommend it if you're having a bad day in a pandemic. This book here that Dr. Wright recommended to me that I read, "We Want to Do More Than Survive, Abolitionist Teaching in the Pursuit of Educational Freedom," is another must read. The author, Dr. Bettina Love, says abolitionist teaching is the practice of working in solidarity with communities of color while drawing on the imagination, creativity, refusal, visionary thinking, healing, rebellious spirit, boldness, determination. I now invite you to return to the power of optimism and imagination. And another of our College of Charleston students, Luna Riley, who's in the room, is working on a project with me and Mr. Chuck Orr, who is a College of Charleston teacher leader. And this is his second year of teaching, and Maida directs the teacher leader program. This teacher is phenomenal. They're at Mitchell Elementary School, and we're working on a project called Us in the Creek. It's a book and critical conscious making project. Here are some outtakes. Listen to their voices.
Can you hear us talking about you?
So we're imagining we're having a conversation with the creek. This artwork here was done with crayons by Luna, who has her own amazing art style. Then the story continues, but they covered you up with pavement and parking lot. And so to ask 8-year-olds, what would you draw to signify a creek being paved over with a parking lot? Now there's not much left of you at all. So they looked at this picture, and this is their interpretation of it. Without your grasses and pluff mud, you can't hold on to the floodwaters like you used to. Here is the street trying to be a creek again. Here's the important discovery, but we see you trying to make a comeback. You're pushing up right through the street.
You are strong just like us.
Again, we're talking to the creek. It is a matter of mattering.
We know why you matter and our community matters too.
So there. So I had to wrap this up faster than I wanted to. The time flew by fast. I want to bring us back to Amanda Gorham. Getting the facts straight is what gets us to act. I had the distinct privilege of working with a group of Latino immigrants, and the focus of our study was to learn how to use National Hurricane Center resources. Amanda Gorham again, it is never too soon to choose hope.
And as you can see, it doesn't matter if you're a second grader, an eighth grader, a high school student, a college student, that ethic of care shows through. Can you see other living things? Can you see yourself in this picture? Can you see other humans in this picture? Can you see non-living things in this picture? Do you get the idea of relationships? It's an ethic of care. It's relational.
So let's return to Gaston Creek and listen to the voices of youth who have come into a relationship with their creek and see themselves in her.
I am the sun, the water, and the grass. I am the tide, the snail, the bird, and the fish. I am the mud, the fiddler, and the algae. I am living, breathing, giving, and protecting. I am nursery, and I am nest. I am food, and I am room. I rise up and stand my ground. The water will always find me, and the sun will be within me. I am Gaston Creek. We are Gaston Creek.
So we're almost out of time. And this was the part where I hope we might even have a couple of seconds to invite Dr. Hollis France and Dr. Cage Bryan, because they're both Frarian scholars and they lead the Transformative Teaching Collective, and they've already done a wonderful presentation on abolitionist teaching. And this is a series of questions that's very often used by creative writing scholar and teacher George Saunders at Syracuse University. And if we have any time at all, Dr. France and Dr. Bryan, might you lead a very brief discussion with these questions here? What are you curious about? Where do you think the story is headed? What do you hope happens? And to what degree might you become a protagonist in this story of care for a community?
So Merrie, are you expecting folks to speak out loud? What is the structure? What are the expectations?
Well, there is no expectation, and that's very aligned with my way of teaching. So I throw a rock in the water and see what happens. So because I have so much respect and honor for your work as Frarian scholars, I would say, what would you do with this now? How can we keep this conversation going?
Well, can I just say something? I'm not in a leadership position right now. All I'm saying is that I have been extremely impressed with the community organizing efforts of the Friends of Gaston Creek, and I'm just beginning my relationship with them, the organizers, as well as the residents. But having the opportunity to be in conversation with a handful of the residents last night, and seeing the organizers, really trying to build relationship and build community in Gaston Green, makes me feel like that is my place of entry now. And I feel so grateful that the children, the young people are exploring their relationship with the creek and the history. I think that's extremely profound. And so really, I just want to applaud you, Merrie, for doing all that work, for being engaged in the community organizing effort, and for continuing to build relationships in the community.
It is a powerful collective impact initiative. Virtually everyone in this room. Barbara Beckingham, could you speak a little to how you're now using the creek as a site for your water quality work?
Yeah, sure. I've been also following the story for the past couple of years, just sort of amazed not only at the history, but at what Merrie and Meta are doing, and the organizers too. So I guess what I'm doing right now is bringing my water resources classes to Gaston Creek, and they're learning about the history. And we are measuring just what you do, water flow in a water resources class, and we're taking samples and we're looking at water quality aspects too. And I don't know where that's leading in either. I'm interested to figure out how I might even get more involved. But yeah, it's sort of a living laboratory.
It is.
You know?
I'm Merrie. I mean, just following up on that, and I don't know how I became a Freirean scholar. I mean, I like Paulo Freire, but I wouldn't say that I'm a scholar of Paulo Freire. But I think that, you know, I really love the approach, and that Meta centers that whole idea of the ethic of care. I mean, I think that is so central for us to be kind of disrupting all of these power structures. But I think one of the things I was really fascinated about by was the whole idea of, you know, the Paulo Freire's idea of the critical consciousness, right? So he has these 3 levels, you know, in terms of the magical state and the naive stage, and, you know, where we need to finally get to that critical stage of consciousness. And I think that you folks do a brilliant job of, especially in terms of these kids in Gaston Green, of getting them to that point of critical consciousness. You know, that 3 stage of what you notice, what you know, and what do you do with the information. And you folks have brilliantly, I think, kind of shepherd them through those 3 stages, you know, of kind of getting there. So I would like to see, you know, it would be interesting to see, you know, they've taken that information, you know, and they've, you know, in different ways, through art, you know, through music, etc. And I'd really like to see what they, as they grow up, right, and they go on to college and so forth, how does this education and this information then inform, right, what they do, you know, even kind of coming back to their community, and perhaps in terms of fighting some of these inequities and injustices.
That is, thank you so much. See, I couldn't have imagined that any better than what you just did. It looks like we have a wonderful comment. Dan Dickinson, can someone speak to the possibility of officially designating Gaston Creek as having rights? Dr. Dickinson, would you like to speak to that? It's an amazing question.
No, that's really beyond my scope of understanding, but I believe it has happened elsewhere in the world that certain sites of, correct me someone here, but I believe areas of the ocean have received this designation. Is that correct, Todd?
Yeah, so I know in New Zealand, they are giving rights to rivers through Maori, right, for the indigenous peoples of that lands through their relationships. So it's slowly happening, right, in Western epistemologies and rule of law.
So Canada just ended up passing a right of nature ordinance with one of their rivers. So they're treating the river as a person. And we've been, our group has been asked to actually explore the possibility of both a climate rights and a rights of nature campaign here in Charleston. We've just started that process, working with some attorneys. One of them is at the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights. So if people are interested in exploring this with us, don't hesitate to reach out.
So exciting. Well, it looks like we are almost out of time. I want to end you with two of my most favorite quotes. And this one is by Robert Moore, who's written extensively on trails. He's researched the ways in which all living things, from the most primitive slime mold up to the human beings, make trails. He says, "A journey is never simply the act of gaining a new perspective, but also the experience of being newly seen." Newly seen. And then finally, this quote by John Berger: "Every story is about achievement. Otherwise, there is no story." Look at what we are all achieving together in our collective work. Let's embrace that, see each other's hearts, our minds, our spirits, and carry this forward. And I would say to you, the word that comes to mind to me is namaste. So the light in me sees the light in you, and may we all be lights unto each other. Thank you so much for the privilege and honor of being here today. I'm an independent scholar. I owe so much to my colleague Maida Van Sickle for creating these opportunities for me to work at the college with her. So, and Todd and Jan, thank you so much.
Thank you, Merrie and Maida, for a wonderful presentation. Just wrapping up, if you haven't taken the climate pledge yet, please consider doing so and sending it out to students and other people on campus, colleagues on campus at sustain.cofc.edu. We're going to be taking the next week off for Climate Fridays, but we'll be back on the 12th of March with Dr. Calvin Blackwell. He's going to be discussing carbon taxes as a solution to climate change. So tune in for that one and follow us on social media at Sustain CFC. And these recordings will be posted on our YouTube page for you to come back to again in the future. Thank you so much for joining us once again.
Thank you so much.